Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C., this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, artists, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about the show at our website, stash.normal.org, and continue the education and conversation on our blog as well. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. The podcasting and blogging technology for the NORML Daily Audio Stash is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. Visit www.redaphid.com. It's Wednesday, March 26th, and it's 4:20 somewhere in the world. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. You can make a difference in the fight to end adult marijuana prohibition. Just join up with the dedicated, hardworking activists of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws at NORML.org. Also, if you have a product that you would like to market to the cannabis community, you can advertise on the Daily Audio Stash. Your ad will be focused on exactly the customer base you're seeking out, the thousands of responsible cannabis consumers who download and listen to this show. Our listeners are educated consumers who want to support the businesses that support the growing truth about cannabis, and we deliver the advertising freedom you won't find on radio, TV, or print ads. To advertise on the Daily Audio Stash, send us an email at stash@normal.org. I want to take a moment to thank all the people who visited our blog at stash.normal.org. Not only will you find the expanded text and links for all of our daily hemp headlines, you'll also find the downloads for the full podcast and all our PodSafe music, commentary from myself and other activists, and you can leave your comments for the whole cannabis community. It's news, it's commentary, it's music, it's the blog that only NORML can deliver, the Daily Audio Stash blog at stash.normal.org. Well, today is Cannabis Science Day here on the Stash, and coming up after the news, we're separating the stems of propaganda from the buds of truth with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. Today, Dr. Mitch has a message to all the college students who are living it up on spring break this week. Be safe and sensible. Learn his techniques for going on the prowl as you party. Then, Cannabis Carry has unearthed a singer-songwriter duo called Molly and Sonny Boy from Minnesota, performing their song called Relax Your Mind for today's musical break. Then we wrap things up with NORML's Deputy Director, Paul Armentano, who joins me to discuss the new push by prohibitionists to create the concept of marijuana addiction to support prohibition, while fully one-third of such addicts in treatment haven't even used marijuana in over a month. So welcome to the show. Sit back with your favorite strain and enjoy your NORML Daily Audio Stash. Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our NORML Daily Audio Stash Hemp Headlines. One-third of marijuana treatment admissions haven't used pot, from the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Agency. According to a recent UPI news story, researchers are now prescribing the psychoactive prescription drug lithium to so-called pot addicts to help them kick the habit. But just who are these alleged addicts? According to the latest statistics from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, a startlingly high number of U.S. government-defined marijuana addicts don't even smoke pot. That's right. According to a recent DHS report, more than one-third of Americans entered into drug treatment with a primary diagnosis of marijuana dependency haven't used pot in the month prior to their admission. How's this possible? It's possible because the majority of folks admitted to drug treatment for pot don't need treatment at all, but were arrested and ordered by a judge to attend rehab in lieu of going to jail. Nevertheless, the White House touts this phony data as evidence that marijuana is allegedly more dangerous than cocaine or heroin, and the National Institutes of Drug Abuse tout these numbers as evidence to support multi-million-dollar cannabis addiction centers. For more information on this subject, please see our Stash blog at stash.normal.org, where we link to the rest of the article by Paul Armentano discussing this subject. We need to get smart about marijuana. Commentary by TV host and travel author Rick Steves in the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. Europe, like the U.S., is dealing with a persistent drug abuse problem. But unlike us, Europe, which treats drug abuse primarily as a public health issue rather than a criminal issue, measures the success of its drug policy in terms of pragmatic harm reduction. Europeans seek a cure that isn't more costly than the problem. While the U.S. spends its tax dollars on police, courts, and prisons, Europe fights drug abuse by funding doctors, counselors, and clinics. European Union policymakers estimate that for each euro invested in drug education and counseling, they save 15 euros in police and health costs. Similar estimates have been made for U.S. health-based approaches by the Rand Corporation and others. When it comes to marijuana, European leaders understand that a society must choose, tolerate alternative lifestyles, or build more prisons. They've made their choice. We're still building more prisons. According to Forbes magazine, 25 million Americans currently use marijuana. Federal statistics indicate that 1 in 3 Americans has used marijuana at some point, which makes it a $113 billion untaxed industry in our country. The FBI reports that about 40% of the roughly 1.8 million annual drug arrests in the U.S. are for marijuana, the majority, 89%, for simple possession. Rather than act as a deterrent, criminalization of marijuana drains precious resources, clogs our legal system, and distracts law enforcement attention from more pressing safety concerns. Like my European friends, I believe we can adopt a pragmatic policy toward marijuana, with a focus on harm reduction and public health, rather than tough-talking but counterproductive criminalization. The time has come to have an honest discussion about our marijuana laws and their effectiveness. We need to find a policy that is neither hard on drugs nor soft on drugs, but smart on drugs. Drug testing school kids ineffective. From the Sydney Morning Herald in Sydney, Australia. Testing school students for drugs has been dismissed in a new report as an expensive and ineffective way of reining in Australia's teenage drug problem. The expert report, released by the federal government's peak advisory body on drug policy, says saliva or urine testing of all students would cost more than $300 million a year, with only limited accuracy and unproven benefits. It would also create a culture of mistrust between students and teachers and would do nothing to stem problems with the most widely used and destructive drug, alcohol, says the Australian National Council on Drugs. There was also no evidence that testing deterred students from taking drugs, and increasing proof that screening distressed and angered students, especially those receiving false positive results. Illicit drugs in schools has also declined in the past decade, with less than 4% now smoking cannabis and less than 1% using other drugs. This makes detection a technically challenging task, the report states. Alcohol is the major drug issue facing teenagers, with figures showing 1 in 5 regularly binge drink to harmful levels. The findings have been welcomed by the Australian Secondary Principals Association and the Australian Drug Foundation, but judged disappointing by the pro-testing lobby group Drug Free Australia.
Marijuana is an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death.
Marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind.
If the hideous monster Frankenstein came face to face with the monster of marijuana, he would drop dead from fright.
Madness.
New Hampshire. Mistake to weaken state's marijuana laws. Well, we're going to follow the reefer madness that it keeps pouring out from the Granite State. More prohibitionists are weighing in on the New Hampshire House passing a measure to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana. Let's see what sort of reefer madness will justify this latest editorial. From the Concord Monitor. The quarter ounce of marijuana the House refers to is in no way a small amount. In fact, a quarter ounce of marijuana can equate to 14 joints, not the 7 that has been reported. Yeah, or 2 joints if you're Dr. Bob Bitchin, Ph.D., M.A., B.A., and a B.M.F. besides. Sorry, couldn't resist. So, explain to me, exactly how is a quarter ounce rolled into 14 joints scarier than that same quarter ounce rolled into 7 joints? Is that like getting a better deal on your large pizza by cutting it into 16 slices instead of 12? The Monitor cites a study done by a Harvard psychology professor in the 1970s. However, the marijuana of today is not the marijuana of the 1970s. It is significantly stronger, with some reports estimating today's strength to be 5 times that of a comparable amount from that time period. We have seen some types of the drug with such high potency that just a couple of joints can lead to serious impairment. Yeah, we get this one all the time. This is the old, this ain't your father's Woodstock pot, this is super pot argument. This is often used because so many parents have tried marijuana in the past and realize it isn't the killer weed the prohibitionists claim it is. First of all, pot today is more or less as potent as you could get in the 1970s. Secondly, THC isn't hazardous, so more of it doesn't equal more danger. It equals less smoking. Marijuana smokers smoke to get high. Surprise! If the marijuana is potent, they smoke a little of it and they get high. If it is less potent, they smoke a lot of it and get high. Since the prohibitionists also like to argue, falsely I might add, that marijuana smoking causes lung cancer, wouldn't smoking less of it be a good thing? You can read the rest of my debunking of this reefer madness at the Stash blog at stash.normal.org.
Georgia. Hi, this is Willie Nelson, and I need your help. Our marijuana laws are terribly unfair, and they make criminals out of law-abiding citizens. Nearly 2,000 Americans are arrested every day on marijuana charges, and we are unfairly destroying the lives and careers of hundreds of thousands of people simply because they smoke marijuana. These are not criminals. They are average citizens like you, good neighbors who work hard, raise families, pay taxes, and contribute to their communities. And it's time we stopped arresting responsible marijuana smokers. We need your help to end marijuana prohibition once and for all. It's the fair thing to do.
For more information, contact NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Call toll-free 888-67-NORML or visit their website at norml.org.
Well, as we do every Wednesday, we like to meet with Dr. Mitch Earlywine, who's an associate professor of psychology at the University of Albany, State University of New York. Thank you for joining us again, Dr. Earlywine.
Thanks so much.
And we've been also giving away copies of Dr. Earlywine's Parent's Guide to Marijuana. We'll remind everyone that you can get a copy of that out at Amazon.com and also through links on our blog at stash.normal.org. And speaking of the parents and kids, I thought today, since we just had the Easter break and we're just hitting springtime, that it might be time that we talk about young people and their possible uses of marijuana and other substances during spring break or other events. And so Dr. Earlywine's the man to talk to on this issue. What should we tell the kids out there that might be listening about their use of marijuana and other drugs during the spring break? What do they have to watch out for?
The funny thing about this is that I actually have a little acronym I use for spring break, and it's called Going on the Prowl. And so each letter stands for something, and everybody makes fun of me. But in fact, then after spring break, I often hear that people used it. The P stands for Plan Ahead. Literally, you've just got to have something fun to do each day that's not necessarily going to require any sort of drug-related work or anything like that, but to make sure you actually plan an event, because otherwise spring break kind of disappears on you, and you realize you didn't get to do the fun things you wanted to do, or you just ended up watching movies and eating Cheetos and not really having all the fun you wish you had had. The R stands for rest, which I know doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but in fact, if you've just finished up your midterms and you're basically in need of sleep anyway, you're stunned at how much more fun you actually have if you go ahead and rest a whole lot beforehand, and then you have a little bit of energy when you do go out. The O is actually for one, and I get a little ribbing about this, but the idea is just that you're only going to use one intoxicant at a time or fewer, and people kind of give me a lot of elbowing about this one as well, but in truth, if you do combine alcohol with anything, you're going to pretty much mess up your perception of what that thing is doing to you. And as we've seen from some other data around here, the THC metabolism seems to slow if you've got alcohol in your system as well, making it just really hard to understand what's going on with you and what effect anything's going to have. The W in Prowl is for water, and I can't emphasize this enough, is stay hydrated if you're out in the sun or if you're drinking alcohol or under any other circumstances. Just make sure you really do get water in between all your other alcoholic drinks or anything like that. And people laugh, but basically if you're ordering drinks in a bar and you can't order a glass of water in between, the universe is trying to tell you something, that it's not time for another alcoholic drink until you've had some water. And finally, the L is the one that creates the most laughter but seems to be the most adaptive, and that's leave early. If you're going to be at a big party, you don't have to be the one to close it down. Trust me, those people who are lingering at the very end of the day aren't going to have any more fun than you are. And if you do leave early, then it's going to be easier to plan ahead, rest, stick to one thing, and get your water in you the next day. And so in the long run, you're going to have markedly more fun if you go on the prowl this way than if you just sort of let things happen on spring break willy-nilly.
I think that's a great acronym, although when you first mentioned it, I was thinking of a couple of other substitutes for L and a couple of the other letters, but I'm sure those other L words come along on their own. And of course, we want to encourage everyone to be safe in that respect as well. Now, I'm glad that you mentioned the one part of this, because I think what will happen with a lot of younger people is they'll want to just try to overdo it, try to think, well, this is spring break and there's some sort of requirement to party hardy, to be the all-time greatest party you've ever had in your lifetime. And that's going to lead a lot of people to experimentation with all these other types of intoxicants. And I'm glad you mentioned that the alcohol combined with the other intoxicants is going to prevent you from understanding what the other intoxicants are doing for you. It's not the time to experiment along with being drunk.
Well, and it's astounding how people who are, a little bit intoxicated with alcohol often make some of the worst decisions we've ever seen. Alcohol is genuinely impairing, and I think because particularly folks who are new to alcohol use or who are just really into it don't understand that is not the time to make a new decision about using anything new, doing anything new, even spending intimate time with anyone new. And so the opportunity is there to, if you keep the alcohol consumption low, the whole lot of other things are going to go well. And in truth, this notion of I've got to squeeze every second of fun out of spring break that I can is kind of naive, because in fact, you're going to get to have fun again. And if you're going to stay alive and have a good time this spring break, you get to stay alive and have a good time next spring break. And what's funny, too, is often the folks who, try to yank every little bit of spring break fun out are the ones who are completely exhausted when they return to work and school the following Monday and find themselves really suffering, whereas if you go ahead and in L kind of leave early again, get yourself some sleep on that Saturday and Sunday beforehand, it's astounding how you go back to school and work and really be able to bounce back and feel refreshed instead of feeling just sort of bedraggled and hungover.
And the water aspect is also important, staying hydrated here. We have, I know when I went to spring break, and I'm going to date this, back in 1993, down in South Padre Island, Texas, that, people were drinking from morning till night, kegs out on the beach, people doing keg stands, and it was just a nonstop alcohol binge. And I was always pretty good about drinking water during those kind of things, and I saw the people around me kind of falling out by 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, just because they hadn't kept themselves hydrated. How does this also then, with respect to other intoxicants? I know that there's going to be people out there that are going to be trying ecstasy, perhaps, and that I hear of a lot of deaths happening with ecstasy due to dehydration.
It's curious because I'm not on top of that literature the way I am on the marijuana literature, but the key issue for water is that it's great for metabolizing damn near anything. And I think what happens a lot of times, I'm up here in the north with all the Yankees, and we run down south and hit the beach really hard and haven't been in the sun more than a half an hour at a time, and suddenly we're out in the sun for 8, 9, 10, 11 hours. And, of course, that's just dehydrating in and of itself. And turns into a very outrageous drain on your body, whereas if you're willing to have, just drink when you're thirsty and then drink 1 cup more, and it's astounding how much better you'll be doing than your friends who aren't necessarily sucking the water down.
Now, in case anyone does end up at a spring break party where someone has gone too far, one of their friends is showing signs of perhaps overdose, what sort of safety tips and help can we give people, or tips that we can give the students out there to help their friends?
The astounding thing is it's never a problem to call 911. You don't get busted by calling 911. You don't end up going to jail for calling 911 when a friend is ill. And I feel like if that information alone was out there, people would understand that everything's really going to be okay. And it's okay to call 911 when really it's too early. And people say, oh, there's really nothing wrong. It's okay. That's so much better than waiting too long and finding out things have already gone too far before emergency folks can get there. Usually the key signs are, is the person listless and non-responsive? If so, get on the phone right away. There's no need to try any of your sort of half-baked ideas about what's supposed to help people. Get a professional there and get them there as quickly as possible, and it's astounding how much difference that can make in somebody's life. And it doesn't matter if it's somebody you know or somebody you don't know. If somebody's there who is listless and non-responsive, go ahead and make the call, and you'll be really, really grateful that you did.
Now, you mentioned some of the half-baked ideas people have to try to help someone who might be in an overdose situation. Let's debunk those myths. What are some of the things you don't do to try to help someone who's in one of those situations?
Well, the ridiculous one that I keep hearing is that you're going to give caffeine to somebody who's had too much alcohol, and somehow that's going to sober them up.
Uh-huh.
All that does is make their body completely confused, and they become these sort of wide-awake, listless drunks.
Yeah.
Is no good at all. The quick move to induce vomiting is also not always the best advice, although certainly unpleasant. It may not often be helpful enough to do what you actually really need to do. And then these other ones about letting people lie down and then sort of leaving them lying on their back where they could actually end up choking and killing themselves is another big issue. So get somebody lying down with their head turned to the side and call emergency medicine right away. They'll coach you through it. You can talk to somebody and find out, is this bad enough that we need to have somebody come out or not? And, there are markedly worse things than having somebody come out and it really wasn't so bad. That's okay. It's the other error we really want to avoid.
Yeah, we don't want to see anyone losing their life just for a spring break. That's definitely not the price you want to pay for spring break.
You got it.
Well, all right. Well, we want to once again thank Dr. Earlywine for joining us here every Wednesday here on the Daily Audio Stash, and want to talk to all the college students out there who'll be enjoying spring break this week and throughout the rest of spring to be safe out there. Make sure you go on the prowl. Let's remind them of what those letters are again.
So P is for planning ahead. R, rest, get plenty of rest. O is for one, just use one intoxicant at a time. W for water, stay hydrated. And L, leave early. Let somebody else close down the party while you head home and get your sleep.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Earlywine, for joining us again on The Stash.
Always a pleasure.
Here at the NORML Daily Audio Stash, we work hard to change our nation's marijuana laws through education and discussion. But we also take the time to relax and unwind with an eclectic mix of pod-safe music from many independent artists. we look for music that speaks to the growing truth about cannabis, or music that speaks to broader themes of freedom, liberty, social justice, equality, and protest. To find out more about the artists and download the music you hear on this podcast, just log on to stash.normal.org. And if you'd like to get your music heard by the online cannabis community, just send us an email at stash@normal.org. Today on our Music Stash, we introduce the singer-songwriter duo of Molly and Sonny Boy and their wonderful song, Relax Your Mind. Not just a great song for a Wednesday, but good advice to boot. They live in New Ulm, Minnesota, and their quirky, entertaining style has them well known in their local community. Molly is a radio announcer at 860 AM KNUJ. Most of their music is uplifting, and most of it is laced with comedy. When not making beautiful music together, they can be found hitting the road on their Harley. Get to know Molly and Sonny Boy at their website, mollyandsonnyboy.com. For more information on this artist, check out our links at music.podshow.com, and an MP3 download can be found at our blog, stash.normal.org. This is Molly and Sonny Boy with Relax Your Mind.
Relax your mind, relax your mind, makes you feel just fine. Sometimes you got to relax your mind. Like that man was crossing that railroad track, you know, he should look forward, he should look back. That's one time he should have relaxed his mind. Relax your mind, relax your mind, makes you feel just fine. Sometimes you got to relax your mind. Sometimes when that light is red, you got to cool your jets before you move ahead. That's one time you've got to relax your mind. Relax your mind, relax your mind, it makes you feel just fine. Sometimes you've got to relax your mind. What I say? Relax your mind, relax your mind, makes you feel just fine. Sometimes you got to relax your mind. Sometimes someone's been bad to you, and now you're thinking about it the whole week through. That's one other time you got to relax your mind. Relax your mind, relax your mind, makes you feel just fine. Sometimes you got to relax your mind. you feel just fine. Sometimes you got to relax your mind. Just like when crossing that railroad track, you know he should've looked forward, he should've looked back. That's one time he should have relaxed his mind. Relax your mind, relax your mind. Makes you feel just fine. Sometimes you got to relax your mind. Sometimes someone's bad to you, you know you're thinking about it that whole week through. That's one time you should have relaxed your mind.
What's up, guys? This is Miss High Times 2007, and you're chilling with us here at the NORML podcast.
And now, a message from President George W. Bush to remind the American people of our responsibility in our nation's war on certain American citizens using non-pharmaceutical, non-alcoholic, tobacco-free drugs.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
That's right, America, use less drugs. Put down the Prozac, the Vioxx, and the Levitra, and turn to the herb. Use less drugs. Our national policy is no longer just say no, it's now just slow down. Well, we're joined here on the NORML Daily Audio Stash by the Deputy Director of NORML, Paul Armentano. Paul, welcome back to the Stash.
Good to be here, Russ.
You know, Paul is also doing a lot of writing and policy analysis for NORML, and you can catch his regular column for the Drug Reporter out there at alternate.org, as well as the new NORML blog, which is at blog.norml.org. And there's one story that got a lot of digs, got a lot of people reading it, and I thought this was just amazing. The headline reads, from the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, that says 1/3 of marijuana treatment admissions haven't used pot. And maybe we should kind of define what's going on with that. 1/3 of the people in treatment for marijuana don't use marijuana? Is that what they're saying?
Well, there is a report that's put out every few years by SAMHSA, and what it does is it looks at individuals who have been placed in treatment for a primary diagnosis of a certain drug. It could be marijuana, it could be alcohol, it could be methamphetamine, it could be heroin, whatever it may be. And what they do is they collect information. Specifically, they collect information on how these people got into treatment. And that's really one of the most important things that we need to look at, because you hear over and over again that there are now more people in treatment for marijuana than all other drugs combined.
Right. That's the big scare we hear a lot lately.
Yes, yes. And, you know, that sounds menacing on the surface unless you look at the actual data and see how, in fact, these people got into treatment for marijuana. And what you find is that nationally, about 60% of every individual who is in treatment for marijuana is there because they were mandated to go there by the criminal justice system.
Right. That would be like the drug courts and the redirection of people from the jail cell to the rehab, right?
Exactly. And certainly people are redirected by the criminal justice system for other drugs as well, but you do not see nearly the prevalency that you see with marijuana for these other drugs. The reason, of course, is because so many more marijuana users are arrested compared to users of other drugs, and most judges, fortunately, would prefer not to send these people to jail. So the alternative is they send them to treatment. And we know in certain states, like Texas, for instance, where a whole hell of a lot of marijuana users, minor offenders, are arrested every year, we see astonishingly over 70% of all the people in drug treatment in that state are there because they were referred by the criminal justice system. Comparison, very, very few people voluntarily self-admit themselves into drug treatment for marijuana. Now, critics could say A small percentage of people self-admit themselves to treatment for other drugs as well. However, the data doesn't bear that out. When you look at drugs like heroin, very high percentages of people overall actually check themselves into rehab. You don't see that with marijuana. Take the criminal justice referrals out, you have very few people entering treatment for marijuana. So to go back to your original question, why are these people entering treatment for cannabis when in fact they admittedly haven't used marijuana in the last 30 days? It's because these, for the most part, are not people who are dependent on marijuana. They're people who got caught up in the criminal justice system. They were probably occasional users, and they wind up in treatment because it's either a condition of their probation or they were sentenced there as an alternative to jail.
Well, that it makes it, too, somewhat of a self-feeding cycle here, I would imagine, since the government goes and uses, and we get National Institutes of Drug Abuse and other government agencies, ONDCP, touting these numbers of people being in treatment for marijuana to justify the need for the laws and the enforcement against marijuana, which takes more people to court, which then feeds more people into rehab, which then, again, boosts the statistics, and it goes over and over and over again.
It's a shockingly vicious circle. What's amazing is if you go back to about the mid-1990s, you will see that admissions to drug treatment for marijuana in every category but criminal justice referrals has actually steadily declined. The only category that has gone up now in the past almost 15 years are these criminal justice referrals, and they have gone up so dramatically that it has led to this whole new rhetoric from the drug czar of saying that, look at how many people are now entering treatment for jail. Well, the increase over the last 10, 15 years is actually proportional to the increase we've seen in overall arrests. So you have the criminal prohibition feeding this bogus system of drug treatment, and then you have the prohibitionists turning around and using this phony data to justify the original policy.
Right. And maybe this is a question for Dr. Earlywine or someone else, but I would imagine that if you've got a bunch of people who are in a drug treatment facility who don't really want to be there or need to be there aside from just being sentenced to go there, that maybe that has an effect on the other people in that facility, not getting as much attention or diluting, the attention that the others would get from these people that don't really want to be there. I can't see that as a good thing.
It's amazing. That's something that isn't talked about a lot and I think ought to be. You can go to every city in America and talk to drug treatment providers, and you know what they'll tell you? They'll tell you that we don't have enough beds.
Yeah.
We've got more people seeking treatment than we can handle. And when you hear that, but then think that you have all of this space being taken up by people that actually don't need treatment and are only there because you've got drug courts and judges trying to get around this archaic criminal policy that we have, then, it gets even more upsetting. And like I said, this is going on for marijuana, probably most egregiously for marijuana, but we'd be kidding ourselves if we didn't think that there were plenty of other people that caught up in the legal system for other drugs, and the same shell game wasn't being played with them as well.
Yeah. It's there's only a finite amount of resources to go around, and to be wasting those resources on so-called marijuana addiction. But let's go to that subject. The study you saw, was it 36% of the people had admitted to not using marijuana in the past 30 days prior to admission. Where does that data come from? Are the people lying about that, or have they really stopped using?
It's interesting. We can make a lot of assumptions. As you mentioned earlier, it comes from SAMHSA, which is the Department of Health and Human Services, and it's a treatment episode data set. That's what the information is known as, and it's from 2006. And like I said, primarily it categorizes how many people are in treatment, what the primary diagnosis of their drug of abuse was, how they got there, their age of first use, their gender, things of that nature. It doesn't go into a whole lot of analysis on why these numbers on their face may look somewhat like they don't make sense. In the past, they have acknowledged that, at least for marijuana, it is the criminal justice referrals that is really moving the numbers. And they've been actually somewhat forthcoming about that. Of course, they haven't drawn any policy implications as to whether this is a good thing or a bad thing or a good or a poor use of taxpayer resources, but they at least acknowledge that the only reason these marijuana admission numbers are climbing is because there's more and more criminal justice referrals, although they don't acknowledge that there's more referrals because arrests are going up.
Right. And you know, we should take a moment to not dismiss the possibility or the fact, for that matter, that there is a small subset of people for whom they have dependency on marijuana. It's not to say that doesn't exist.
Sure. And in fact, in the alternate article that you referred to in the beginning of this conversation, you know, I point out that there are a certain subset of marijuana users that at some point in their lifetime will exhibit symptoms that are associated commonly with drug dependence. Now, I think it's important to put that in context and point out that this subset of users is much smaller than the proportion of alcohol consumers or tobacco smokers or users of drugs like cocaine that at some point develop symptoms of dependence. For marijuana users, it seems that over someone's lifetime, maybe 5% up to as high as 9% of users at some point may exhibit signs of drug dependence. And it's funny when you look at the marijuana treatment admission numbers and you look at the percentages of people who do voluntarily check themselves into treatment for marijuana, you see numbers somewhat similar to that percentage.
Okay. Now, the other edge to this here, the other part of the argument, at least from the government's point of view, from ONDCP and the prohibitionist point of view, would have to be the purpose. Why are they trying to come up with this concept of marijuana addiction? I've run across a couple of stories where there are massive amounts of grant money going out to researchers that are looking to paint the picture of marijuana addiction, and of course not any funds going out to those that are researching medical marijuana or drug policy reform.
Yeah, you know, they're literally spending millions of dollars to try and, you know, imply that there is a clinically significant syndrome of marijuana addiction, and they're also spending millions of dollars to try to identify a clinically significant symptoms associated with so-called cannabis withdrawal. As I pointed out in my article, NIDA, the U.S. National Institute on Drug Abuse, they just gave $4 million for the development of the first in the United States Cannabis Addiction Center, which will be based in Southern California, and their investigators there will be researching this topic full time. As I mentioned, and you mentioned on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, you've got some Australian researchers now suggesting we give lithium to individuals who are deemed to be marijuana addicts. And I think when we're talking about a syndrome that, if it exists at all, impacts only a very minor subset of the population, that we really need to put some of this in perspective. We should not be spending millions of dollars to investigate, a syndrome that, like I said, if it exists, affects or impacts so few people, and we should certainly not be going the route of talking about taking this subset of people and perhaps giving them or prescribing them, psychoactive medications that are far more dangerous and stronger than marijuana.
Yeah, might as well cut your thumb off to treat the hangnail. This is crazy.
Like I said, I think it's important that as a community, we don't deny that these symptoms could be there for some people. We need to be aware of them, and anyone who's engaging in the use of any intoxicant needs to be aware of whether they're having a healthy relationship with that intoxicant or an adverse relationship with that intoxicant. And clearly some people can have adverse relationships with marijuana. Some people can become psychologically dependent on marijuana. Some people, if they've used for a long time and quit, can suffer some symptoms of agitation, restlessness, sleeplessness. We're not denying that. As a community, we need to recognize that is the case. But should we be spending millions of dollars? Should our government be claiming that marijuana is highly addictive, as Scott Burns, the mouthpiece for the ONDCP, did just yesterday in a press release? And should we be using these phony data sets as a justification to arrest 800,000 Americans every year on marijuana charges? Not at all.
Right. Well, Paul, I could talk to you all day about this, but we got to move on. So I want to thank you for joining us here on the podcast today. Paul Armentano, the Deputy Director of NORML. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Russ.
Thank you for downloading the NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. We are produced by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. Our executive producer is Alan St. Pierre. Our deputy director is Paul Armentano. Our webmaster is Brian Judy. And web production is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. As always, you can catch up on the latest information about marijuana at www.norml.org. And you can interact and download from our Audio Stash blog at stash.norml.org. For everyone here at NORML, I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, hoping all your harvests are bountiful and your encounters with law enforcement are non-existent. We leave you with today's cannabis quote from Carl Sagan, the famous astronomer, physicist, and author. Quote, "The illegality of cannabis is outrageous, an impediment to the full utilization of a drug which helps produce the serenity and insight, sensitivity and fellowship so desperately needed in this increasingly mad and dangerous world." End quote. Yes, Dr. Sagan, you're absolutely right. We need to end adult marijuana prohibition now. I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you tomorrow, and take care of each other.